webinar. It's part of the future funding programme for development of commercial skills and income generation skills across the library sector, and it's supported by the Arts Council, delivered by Libraries Connected. Today we're going to be talking about Section 106 funding and CIL funding, and it's something I know absolutely nothing about. So what I'd like to do is hand straight across to Sophie Lancaster, who's one of the senior managers at Arts Council England, who's going to talk us through what Section 106 and CIL funding are, how they're structured and how to access it. And then later on, we've got two of our heads of service of public libraries so we've got Ayub from Warwickshire and we've got Martin from South Gloucestershire, who will be talking about their experiences of accessing this funding. What we will be able to do is we'll have time for questions at the end, and if you could ask questions in the chat, just put a Q colon and then put the question in, and then we'll be able to pick them up. But also, there might be some specific questions that you have for Sophie, Martin, or I throughout it. So we will have a couple of minutes just after each presenter, just questions as well. And one last thing before we move across to Sophie is that this session is being recorded, and it'll be going out on our YouTube and through our national networks as well. So if you don't want to be shown on it, then feel free to take your video off, but obviously just be aware that it is being recorded. So straight away, I'm going to hand across to Sophie Lancaster from Arts Council England.
Right, I'm just going to try and share my screen. Has that worked at all?
No.
Right, everything has completely disappeared on my screen now.
I can see it.
Definitely for me.
Okay. Is that everything okay? Can everyone see the first slide?
Yep.
Lovely, thank you. Right. Oh, sorry. My gallery is now in the way of my screen. Right, okay, so as Ian said, I'm Sophie Lancaster and I work in the library development team in Arts Council England. And this is a very brief presentation about how library services can engage with their local planning team or services. And basically the main message is effective engagement early on in the planning process from library services can influence the infrastructure of the towns and cities within your area. And also I need to stress that any data that I'm using is based as at 2019. Right, I'm going to try and be clever. Does Arts Council fund capital builds and fit outs for the library services? This is a bit of a quick quiz. Anybody? I'll just do, it's too many people, but yes, we do. What does CIL stand for? Community Infrastructure Levy. What is the spend per person for local authorities on housing, planning and culture? Roughly £89. The percentage of library services that have benefited from CIL is around 25%. And what can you spend CIL on? This is quite a long statement here, but basically it's anything that you think you could spend, and it doesn't have to be part of that particular development. It can be for something that's further away from that development that you're getting that planning gain from. Right, this is a bit more of a tricky one. Who pays for local government? So local government, as you know, is funded through central government, and roughly 52%, and that includes business rates, revenue support grants and the public health grant. Roughly, locally raised funding is about 48%, which includes council tax and other revenue income sources. Now, this is where it should say by 2020/21, there was where the funding formula was going to be looked at and have a bit more of a divide up, a bit like a cake. But this is where it gets a bit more complicated. What government is worried about is the council tax. So, for example, a Band D property in Wiltshire is more expensive than a house in Westminster. So what they're trying to do is reduce the disparity across the areas, and they want to resolve the issue. But one of the other things is that they want to move away from grants to other forms of funding. So the business rates model was one that they wanted to look at, but this concept is falling away because of the experience of COVID-19, and government are now looking at alternative models of funding and the formula funding review, but nothing's been set. And to be fair, and without being political, this has been something that various governments have tried to deal with and not really done anything about it for the last 20 years. The biggest issue for local authorities is roughly 40 to 50% of their budget is spent on adult social care. Also, in some areas, it's children's services. So, yes, as I said, so that's how we are. So there we go. Local government funding accounts for about a quarter of all public spending. That's just to recap. And this is, again, this is based on 1718. Data from MHCLG. That gives you an indication of how much other areas, local government areas, money is spent on. So the Community Infrastructure Levy is a tool for to help deliver on infrastructure projects. Sorry, I've just lost my screen again. Unlike the Section 106, the CIL can be used by the local authority to support development of infrastructure away from a specific site. Sorry. And in England, it's slightly different in the other nations. The levy is collected by the district, metropolitan councils, London borough councils, unitaries, and national park authorities, and mayors. And they can decide the best way to implement the levy in their area and to identify the priority areas of the infrastructure to allocate these funds to. Now, this is based on the data that we had in 2019 from when we did the report. What's surprising is out of 93 library authorities that we spoke who replied, only not many people actually had dealt with it or had any engagement with their planning services regarding CIL. This is another one, is your library and archive included in the neighbourhood plan? And I think as you can see, there's a large percentage of don't know and no, but we need to expand that yes section. And this comes back to my point about engaging earlier on in the planning system and the planning process. And this one again, overwhelmingly, they do want to find out more about it. And it would be nice to see if we can increase the number of library services gaining from Section 106 and the CIL. I know you've got some live examples coming up, but this is just to give you an indication of some of the money that some library authorities have received. And there are plenty of other examples, but it just gives you an indication that you can utilise these mechanisms. So the final thing is, you need to look at the whole system as the whole system, how the local authority works in terms of the planning process. You need to clarify the demands and the evidence of need. You need to collaborate with all your colleagues within the local authority that have anything to do with the local planning process. And I should also say that when we developed this particular document, we worked with the Planning Advisory Service and MHCLG to produce this report. And that's it. That was a very whistle-stop tour. There we go. I will try and stop sharing. Has that worked?
Yep.
Yes,
Excellent.
that's perfect. Thank you, Sophie. Does anyone have questions directly for Sophie before we move on to any of the live case studies? Anyone wants to either raise their hand or shout out or... No? Well, all right. In that case, we'll move on to Martin Burton. Martin is he's got a more complicated child than this, but head of the library services in South Gloucestershire, and he's going to talk us through his experience of CIL and Section 106 funding.
Okay. Can you see the screen all right?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you.
Okay. So I'm Martin Burton. I'm the customer contact manager in South Gloucestershire Council. So I manage all the front-facing services in the council, and that includes managing the library service. I've been doing the job for quite a long time, so I've seen Section 06 and CIL come about and seen the benefits that we have within our authority. I'm going to talk mainly about Section 06 contributions because that's where most of our money's come from. We can have a discussion about CIL. We haven't been that successful with CIL because that has tended to go to highways and other bigger sections in the authority. So just something about South Gloucestershire. Oh, sorry, let's get that. I think it's quite useful to put it in context. So we're just north of Bristol. We're a unitary authority, and that's quite important. It means that the planning department is within our authority, and I might want to say something about dealing with district councils, but it certainly makes working with planning a great deal easier. We are a fast-growing authority. At one stage, South Gloucestershire was the fastest growing local authority in England. So we've seen a phenomenal increase in our housing in the west of England and in South Gloucestershire. We've got 12 libraries, so we're a relatively small authority. We don't have major centres of population either. We don't have a large central library. We're mainly community libraries. And I just want to talk about 4 key areas, I think, in dealing with Section 06. First of all, the national policy that you need, the evidence, how to work with planning, and some tips on being flexible. So first of all, you need to start off with that there is national planning policy framework, which gives a clear indication that libraries are eligible for Section 06. And Sophie has alluded to something in the ACE document. And unlike other well-established communities which have a variety of social venues, when we're building new communities, the library is sometimes of absolute vital, and I think I'm probably speaking to the converted here, but it's not just about the value of reading, but that community space, the supporting of communities that libraries can provide. So the 2 key documents, the NPPF and the NPPG, both of which clearly say that libraries are eligible for Section 06 funding. And the National Design Guide really just lays out some good practice in terms of designing buildings in communities. So you've got those, each of your authorities will have a local plan which outlines what the plans are for your authority. You've probably all seen that, but if you haven't, it's worth having a look at. So within ours, we have a cultural infrastructure part of it about cultural activity, and that says the council will work with partners, and therefore they'll be asked to contribute for additional extended enhanced community infrastructure. So there's a clear remit in the council policy says we will ask partners for funding of cultural activities. And then below that, there sits the key document for us is the infrastructure delivery plan. And that provides all the evidence that you need to show why you need Section 06 funding. And there's some key principles in this. First of all, you have to show when you apply for Section 6, is it necessary? So can you demonstrate that if you didn't have that money, the level and the quality of services would deteriorate, that the new population would put added pressure on that building and that service. So if you've got a large library with loads of space and they build some houses next door to it, the developers might turn around and say, well, actually, you've got enough space anyway. Why do you need any more funding? So you just have to show that it is actually necessary to the development. Is it reasonable? Are you asking for a reasonable amount of money? And for Section 06, unlike CIL, it has to be directly related to the development. So if you've got if you do have the money, you have to show it will benefit that particular community. So you can't get a load of money and say, well, we'll spend it in another library several miles away. You cannot do that. You could be audited on this, so it is quite important then in Section 06 you can clearly demonstrate that you have spent the money on that community. And finally, does the application mitigate for increased population? Again, in spending the money, you just have to be careful what you're spending the money on. So we've used it to increase library space, new PCs, buying stock, but spending on perhaps staff facilities, does that have a benefit to increase community? You know, not too sure. So just be aware of that. You just have to bear these in mind when you're spending the money. And then the evidence. So you need to obviously have a really good evidence base for this. Again, so if you haven't got this already, this is what you will require. First of all, the catchment areas for each library. So we did an exercise, and probably you've all done this, plotting where people where people live and which library they use. It's not just a case of concentric circles. People use libraries based on where they go to school, where they shop. So we've mapped all the libraries and where people use them, and that's quite important. So when a development application comes in, you can say they are more likely to use this library, or it might be 2 libraries, and therefore you will apply for money for funding those libraries. You need to know what floor space you've got, and how you would use that money. So it could be for expansion. In a really major development, you might be asking for a new library. As Sophie said, really work with your planning colleagues, get to know them, offer to name book bays after them. Have been known to do that as a joke, but they will do the negotiation on your behalf. I've never been really involved in I have been involved in face-to-face negotiation with developers, but it's quite rare. So they will go into those negotiations. So make sure they've got all the information they need to do those negotiations. Generally, funding is mainly for capital. It's not revenue. We did once get an successful application for paying for staffing for opening hours, but that was quite rare. And one of the questions, and it might seem a silly question, but if you might say, well, great, we can open a new library with that capital funding, but have you got the revenue funding to actually run it? You need to think about that, and obviously don't build anything that you can't actually run. And as Sophie said, you've got to get involved at a very, very early stage. If you see a building being built and think, oh, we could get money for that from Section 06, you're too late. You've got to get there when they're sorting out the planning permission. So Section 06 is part of the planning permission, and it takes an awful lot of negotiation within planning to agree the Section 06. And we use the national standard. I was going to say more about the national standards that were set up in 2001, but the really key one that we use from those standards, even though they're 20 years old, is there was a standard in there of 30 square meters of public library space per 1,000 population, and I'll talk about how we've used that in a second. So this is just a typical table that we have in our documentation. So Bradley Stoke Library, it's got a catchment area of 36,000. Gross floor space of 582. So based on that standard of 30 square meters population, we've got a deficit of 520 square meters because the building should actually be 1,000 square meters. So should a development application come through, we can say to development, we haven't, the library's just not big enough, and having your development in that community will place added pressure on that building. Therefore, we need a contribution from the developer. And this is how we do the calculation. So first of all, and this is from a document the Museums, Libraries and Archives organisation did. They're now defunct, and we're taken over by the Arts Council. But this is what we've used in the past, and I've updated it for today's session with the recent figures. So there's an average cost. The BCIS is the Building Cost Information Service. Your planning department will have access to this. And that says if you build a typical library, it's about £2,500 square metre. Then you add on various other costs for external works, design costs, fitting out costs, etc. So cost per square metre is about £5,500. And then you work out, that's at the bottom, that's for 30 square meters, 1,000 population, that'll be 167,000. So for each person in a community, we would be asking for £167 per head. I say that's quite, we used to be asking about, it's gone increase, it used to be about £120 we're asking, and we were very successful in using this formula to get Section 06 applications, in the last 10 years. So what we spent the money on, I said, just be careful on what you do spend the money on. But for large developments, we have extended a number of libraries using Section 06. We use it for stock. We put an Open Plus system in, which is you probably all know, it's a swipe card access system when public can use buildings when the library's closed. But it funded that because, again, it enables us to open our extended opening hours, which mitigated against the increased population, IT equipment, furniture, internal refurbishment. So that's the sort of things that we've used the money for. And this is the sort of monies that we've been talking about. So I just did a quick tot. I mean, last 10 years, and we've been going longer than this. We've had 48 successful applications, and they've raised some very small amounts to about 266,000. And it's been worth to us about just over £1 million, and the average one is 25,000. And we've got quite a lot of money coming about in threshold, because when you get the money, it doesn't always, you don't get it straight away. You just have to be patient. So, it is a really valuable source of income, and one not to be overlooked. So just some final tips. First of all, you've got to be patient. Many developments take years. I mean, we've got ones that were 10 years ago. We did the negotiation, and then you just forget about it, and then suddenly you get a note say, oh, they've hit the threshold, because you won't get the money straight away from the day one. There will be thresholds, so it might be the 150th dwelling or the 300th dwelling, because obviously the developers need that cash flow into their coffers before they can pay you. And it's worth just keeping an eye on thresholds, because obviously the council might be all these developments taking place. So sometimes we do chase our colleagues in plan and say, well, have we hit the threshold yet? But I say, you have to be really patient, because they just take an awful long time sometimes to come around. The other thing just to be aware of is clawback. So usually within most sectional agreements, there's a period of time when you must spend the money by. And sometimes I think there have been cases in some authorities where developers come back and say, well, you haven't spent the money, we'll have it back. Now, we tend to try and pool money, because obviously if you might get, I don't know, 50,000 for a development, and you say, well, I can't do very much with that in terms of expanding a building, but we know the development's coming around. When we get a certain figure, we could actually extend the library. So be aware of clawback, but it's sometimes worth pooling Section 06, again, as long as it's relevant to that development. The other thing is just be flexible. So we tend with the money we get not to build new libraries, and we've done mainly joint developments. So we've worked with community centres. So we might build a community centre and say, well, the community centre will fund so much, we'll bring our money in, we'll put a small space in that community centre for the library, or it might be in a sports centre, it might be flats, it might be hubs. We've certainly looked more at doing joint developments, and I don't think we're unique in this. I think most new libraries tend to be multi-use centres. And the other problem, I think the problem we have had is that you might have some buildings that you've basically reached capacity, no matter how much money you've got. They are, it might be in a shopping centre where you can't expand. And we don't ask for money where we can't use it for a building. So we might then go back to a stock only bid. And that's sort of £10 a head, which is, going from £167 a head to £10 is quite a big drop. So we usually try to look at, if we can use it for building work, we can't, we will. I just want to end with a case study, which just hopefully summarizes a typical case. So about this, again, this is probably about 10 years ago, we negotiated this, and it happened, we actually came about 3 years ago. So there was a new community being built in our area. It was 350 dwellings, which works at about 1,000 people. I think the average is about 2.4 people per dwelling. So according to our formula, we got 48,000 for that, just for that new community. In the same area, an extra retirement village was being built quite a luxurious one, really. It had a gym and a shop in it, really nice centre, and that was 339 residents. So we worked with the developers, we worked with the retirement home, and so the retirement village had to give us some funding because obviously they were bringing new residents to the authority. They funded a library building. They were going to have a library in there anyway, and we said, well, could we work with you and turn that into a public library? They furnished it, they've pitted out again as part of their contribution, and they gave us a financial contribution of £7,500. So in total, we've ended up with, with a new library and 55,000 to keep it going with stock and equipment. So I think that's quite a good example about being flexible, seeing what's there and working on the ground with the planning authority, and just making sure how you can make the best use of that funding. So that was a fairly whistle-top tour of our experience, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end about how we've got on.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Martin. We've had a couple of questions for Martin. There's a few questions that have come up, which we'll save till a bit later on. But one of them was just about how we identify and track the thresholds. There's been useful discussion in the chat saying that the thresholds are set as part of the Section 106 agreement. But then how do we track them, or do we just have to keep asking?
Yeah, I think you just keep asking. I mean, it does seem an odd way, because I think some of our officers actually go around counting curtains of houses to see whether they're lived in, because I mean, developers are very good. They'll tell us, but perhaps it gets overlooked that they have hit a threshold. So I think we're just aware of them, and we know what they're doing and say, well, has it hit? Because when the thresholds will not just be for library contributions, very often they'll say when they hit the 200, it will click in the new school, it will other developer contributions will click in at the same time. So they are quite key, and they will trigger an awful lot of money. So perhaps developers might not tell us, but generally they're very good. So I think you just, again, that's working with your planning colleagues to say, I see that development is really expanding quickly. Have we hit the threshold yet? And they might want to then chase developers saying, have you hit the 200 dwelling yet?
Yeah. Brilliant, thank you. Are there any other questions, just specifically for Martin, before we move on to Ayub? No? There was one quick question I just had about that is in your experience, I don't know whether this would be an issue or would be anything, is there any sort of controversy over what counts as a dwelling? Do developers start to quibble where they've got, like, say, I don't know, as a block of 5 flats, and whether that counts as a single dwelling, or 2.5 dwellings, or 5 dwellings?
So when you do a planning application, the developers will say, well, this is what we're building, and it might be small flats, large 5-store houses. So that will all be, when we get to the actual detail of the application, it will say what sorts of houses are being built. So we will know roughly the population. And sometimes we've had cases where we've agreed the Section 106, and they said, actually, we didn't build those large houses. We only built small ones in the end. So you're going to get less money. So the 2.4 is an average we work to start off, really. And then we finesse it as we go through the planning application, and we know what the mix of the housing is.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Any other? There's a couple of someone's just asked whether all authorities are still receiving Section 106, and we'll take that a bit further on after we've spoken to IO, because it would be good to have the wider discussion around that, and how much CIL has taken over from Section 106. So thank you, Martin. Can I introduce now Ayub Khan, who is Head of Service from Warwickshire Council, Warwickshire Libraries, and he is going to talk about his experiences. And one of the key differences is that Warwickshire is a district council, and so it is one of those 2-tier authorities. So that'll hopefully answer some of the questions that have been asked in the chat already as well.
Right. Can you see the first screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, okay, sort of delighted to be here. I'll give you more of a practical sort of approach to Section 106 sort of CIL, sort of from Warwickshire's perspective, and I'll sort of be sort of quite honest in terms of how we've been sort of doing it and a bit of a flavour of our experience. I think it's useful just to know the sort of type of sort of county that we are. We're not a unitary like Martin. Quite envious because the planning department's all part of the same outfit. So we're a county council, so we do rely on sort of district council in terms of working with them around some of the sort of planning sort of issues. But also, I'd like to also touch upon, I think we saw something in the chat around sort of community libraries. How do we sort of deal with sort of community libraries within the sort of planning application? And what you've got here, so our library is probably sort of similar to many others in terms of the sort of makeup of our sort of services there. And on the right, we've got 5 district and boroughs, and each are a local planning authority in its own right. So we have to work with all 5. But once we've got our formula, it's okay, because what we do is basically just duplicate it to whatever area it is. But sometimes that's useful, and sometimes it's sort of quite sort of difficult there, because interestingly, out of the 5 district and boroughs, we get Section 106 CIL planning from 4 of the 5, but North Warwickshire basically don't sort of agree or support libraries or planning game, but all the others do across that. So that's an interesting point. But as Sophie said, and Martin, you've got to engage very early with the sort of planning sort of department. And I suppose what I've got here, it's quite a lot of information on the slides, but I thought it's useful when this document sort of arrived to you. You might be able to use some of this for your own benefit in terms of putting your case together. The key thing is really, it's the business case. Well, why should developers sort of give you, and you've got to go to the planning department and sort of really solve the reason why libraries should be in there. Yes, legally it's in all the documents, libraries can be included, but some councils will say, well, no, we don't agree, libraries shouldn't be included, we'd rather parks are more important, or schools and health centres. So therefore, you've really got to sell libraries, and it's not an either-or case, but really there. So the first thing we've done, and I've got this sort of from our sort of application, our sort of business case. So we said we're a statutory service and remind the planning department around comprehensive and efficient, and by law that we have to do one. The second point is really around, reminding that directly the numbers of people really will affect the people that use the library. So we were able to demonstrate that 70% of households, are library members. So it might be not every single person in that household is a library member, but from surveys that we've done before, we said, the children or one of the adults might be a member. So we said, actually, yes, there's a relation between the sort of two there. And obviously, the more people in an area, the more pressure it puts that. So don't forget to say the basics, because, we might just assume all this, but you've got to go and say, making the case to the planners, this is the reason why we need to be funded. Also, new housing development increases the number of residents in the area, even if people move about, basically, therefore, more population, more use of sort of libraries there. We also demonstrated sort of in our sort of case that, right, in terms of the council tax, I think this is sort of a few years, in year X, £15 came to the library service in the current revenue support grant that we get, so therefore it's not really sort of sufficient to sort of run library service if they're expanding. So we really sort of realise that actually, developers, we get very little for every council tax that we get for libraries there. Also, it's really interesting, this point about service standards. I'm glad that it was sort of in the earlier sort of presentation, because we use the national standard sort of quite useful, because what developers and planners really like are numbers and formulas. You would have sort of got that from Martin's point. So we just basically said, look, if we we have more people in our area. We've got standards to meet, and we will be not meeting those standards if you don't sort of give us that. We remind them that, you know, it is sort of a, you know, we are included in the CIL and NPO that Sophie sort of mentioned earlier on. So therefore, we really need to have funding for that. Also, as part of our sort of business case, our pitch to say to developers, look, so, we need money for libraries. What we basically done is basically got the populations of all the areas of sort of Warwickshire, so it put it all down, it's about 500,000 there. Broke it down to the district and boroughs, because don't forget, because we're a district council, we're working with the district boundaries and the planning authorities within sort of districts. So what we'll say is, for example, that let's look at, Stratford upon Avon, it's got a population of 120K, and basically we have 33,000 registered members, so about 25%, 27% of that area are library members. So therefore, we're making the case that, you know, the more people there are, the more sort of libraries there. So this is sort of quite useful, and it also links to how we sort of get the sort of funding. So basically asked, so we made the case, and they've agreed, yes, okay, we agree, you have got a case, libraries can get section 106 CIL funding, we agreed that. And then we start looking at the formulas, and our formula is quite different to Martin's that I've shown you, and every local authority will have it differently, so don't worry, there isn't a master that fits all. You just have to be able to negotiation, where Martin's has been mainly based upon floor areas. What ours is mainly sort of based on is sort of stock and sort of numbers of people there. So what we basically do is, this is how it works. The library team receive a list of weekly applications, so every week the planning department, so we don't have to go sort of a routine, you know, in the papers where new planning applications are there. Every week, we just basically, in our email, the planning department from the county council's area will just send us a list of all the plans to go through it. And we get someone, we've given it to a member of staff, an administrator, and it works really well. So what Julie will do is basically go through it every week, and we've agreed that we will only ask for money if the development is more than 25 dwellings. So obviously, if there's a couple of houses being built here and there, we're not really going to sort of bother. But basically, anything that's got more than 25 dwellings, yes, we will do that. And I think the way we've said it is, it's interesting, the question about how big the development, the way we've done it is the number of bedrooms. So we basically said, you know, if it's more than three bedrooms, we will then claim funding for that, because we're more likely that would be family use, and they would be using the library there. Then what we do is the planning application sort of details are checked in respect to sort of, you know, the housing mix of sort of location, which sort of library is there. We've got a bit of a spreadsheet that we put all that information on there. See what area, which library is in the area, and then basically we've got this little spreadsheet. So obviously, once we've done this, we only have to do this once. You know, we've created this in sort of libraries, and we just basically, you can see this is one here. Number of dwellings, 125, and I think it's sort of 75 £5, but per dwelling sort of there. And what sort of basically happens, expected inhabitants, you know, within that sort of dwelling would be 250, and then there's a formula that we use basically based on sort of the number of bedrooms across there, and then it just basically pops out with a figure, and sort of say, so for that one development we're expecting 2,285,000, and then basically what Julie will do is basically fill in a form and send that to our planning department across there, and so we get that, we send that to filing. Then again, good point Martin made, we've got to be very, very patient. We've sent the form off, we've said we want 2,500 for that little development there, and it belongs to that library, and then we just bait of a waiting game. We just wait. When the plans have been approved and building sort of commences development, then it hits triggers. Some of the developments say you'll get 50% of the money when when we start building. Some say we'll give all of it to you when somebody moves in. Others say we'll give half. Lots of different sort of things, and we'll basically include sort of indexation sort of on that. But we don't have to worry about any of that. All we have to do is basically, all we're worried about is saying, identifying where the dwellings are, identify how much is owed to us and which library it goes to, and we just send it off, and we don't need to worry about sort of across there. And then invoices are checked sort of regularly for sort of payments, and we have a spreadsheet. So whenever payments go, we've got a special code that we use for all planning money that comes in, and automatically the council makes it happen, the planning department within the council, when they get the money. Because don't forget that they'll be getting money, and there'll be huge amounts of money. They'll be getting millions. It'll be for schools, for health centres, for parks. They'll be getting that, and they've got a whole system of how it works, and that we basically get the crumbs really in terms of library. So there's a system that sort of works, but we have our own sort of recording system, and it basically the money appears in one of our special cost centre that we've got that. And as Martin mentioned, you have to be patient, but you have to make sure you don't. We have 7 years to spend the money in, so you don't have to spend it all in there. So we've got money that we've sort of had. After 7 years, the developers can claim that money back. So we've got to make sure that we don't use all that money there. We can use it all. We can use it straight away, but we have 7 years. And in some ways, it's great doing that because it can carry year in, year in, year in. So we've always got some money to play with when we want that. In terms of the challenges, we have had challenges to people. I want to be sort of honest, and that basically people have said that, well, developers have come back to us more and more now because their margins have become smaller and smaller. And they're saying, well, why are we funding you twice? We're building you all these houses, and therefore all these houses are basically giving council tax to you. So why are you then also taking it from when we're building the house, we're getting people in, and then the house is earning council tax? And this is just one. Somebody came to us, this is a real example. Well, you'll be getting 11.8 million of council tax from us, because of building this house, and now you want money when we're building as well. So that's why we've really got to go back to that business case and say, well, basically it has we have to fund the revenue of running that library over a period of time, and the council tax helps us pay for the revenue cost, but we have to have infrastructure support. Quick facts, which I thought might be of interest to you. We have, over a period of time, we've been running this scheme for a long time, and we must have gained at least sort of £9-10 million since the scheme started. It's about sort of 12-13 sort of years, so it's not an insignificant amount of money that we've raised over the years there. Basically, yes, we have 7 years to spend the money, and that's what we've sort of negotiated, part of our sort of areas. I don't know whether that's a national thing or whether that's a local thing there. As you said, you can take 5 years for the money to come in. So when you're looking at Section 106, don't think if you start it tomorrow, it's going to deal with your budget problems tomorrow, because, when they start building, or the planning application will take years. So this is really a long-term thing. But if you start now, in 5 years' time, you'll have a nice sort of pot of money that you can keep coming into there. We've built it into our routine administration about how we sort of collect it. Before, a senior manager used to do all this, and they weren't very good in terms of always finding which applications came in. They were busy sort of doing their management something. So as soon as we gave it to an individual and said it's part of your job, who does all our sort of invoicing and also does all the overdue. So, and that's perfect. Julie manages so well because she's got an eye for doing sort of the sort of details. So that's worked really well. So make sure you give it to somebody as part of their job, just to sort of do that there. Mentioned to you 4 out of the 5 districts buying scheme, 1 doesn't, and that's it. They just said, sorry, libraries aren't a priority within our planning application, we're not doing that, but we get it for 4 of the others. Close working with the planning teams, that's already there. Martin's, I think, alluded to that. We have had audits, And audits have come back after about 5-6 years saying you had that development, demonstrate that that funding has gone to that library and show us the receipts. So we're quite sort of surprised there. So you do need to keep sort of good records about how you can do it. But we have been stretching what we use it for over a period of time. Again, yeah, mentioned this, increasingly developers are contesting the funding, saying, you know, we're not giving it. And what we've basically agreed is when a few years ago we started also having community managed libraries, social enterprise sort of libraries. We've got 12 of those. The first slide sort of showed that we've got a number of those. What we've agreed in all those agreements in the planning sort of areas, or with those community libraries, is we said that council will basically keep 70% of the money and 30% will go to the community managed libraries if it's within that catch area. And all of them are quite happy because we say we're doing all the work, we're collecting all this money for you on our behalf, and mainly we're using it for stock and sort of resources. So therefore, you know, that's one of the infrastructure support that we do for those sort of libraries, and the 30% goes there, and they've all been very happy because, you know, they get 30% for nothing. And a lot of the development are around the small little villages where the community managed sort of libraries are, so they get that. It's a great source of additional sort of income. It's not on our annual balance sheet, if you like. We have a special code, and because we can use it over 5 years, we basically, you know, it's not like seeing, you know, you've got an overspend or underspend. It's specially designated sort of funds, so it's just great to have that there. And during lockdown, you know, we spent £25,000 on additional sort of ebooks. What happened was we've got about 22 libraries that have got money. You know, it's, you know, it's the libraries, but we keep it all centrally. And what we said to all of them, can you basically put a chip in all from your, you know, percentage each to buy ebooks? Because we were a bit worried whether, you know, ebooks isn't a physical development and how can you prove it? But we can prove the fact that they gave 5% or 1% of their planning gain for that to support that. So we did sort of keep some areas there. We use the public library service standards really sort of quite a lot in the making the case in terms of how we were doing that. So we said, although they're not statutory, we said they still are public library standards. Nobody has said that, you know, they're not. So you know, we haven't really gone to the developers as well. Really, none of us use them no longer or something. We say these are standards that are produced, and this is what, you know, there's nothing else to compare that is. And what we've basically done was we pulled out the key standards that relate to a place. So, you know, distance from the library, around opening sort of hours, PCs, which says all these sort of relate visitors to the numbers there. And therefore, you know, we have replenishment rates for libraries. So therefore, you know, this is really just to help us build the case with the developers and with the planning department. So, oh yes, we understand now that having a large population will affect all these. So therefore, we've got to make sure we give you a proportion of that. And what we've done is we basically, this table, you know, when this is all sent out to you, you can sort of see how it's all sort of done. You can see what the standard is, what the measure is, what the sort of formula is that we use, arrange that. So for example, the building one is basically what we do is like 2 miles per library. So what you say, £75 based on sort of current sort of usage there. And all this is done a little while ago. We talk about the PNs and they've got some ideas about what the replacement rate is, and we've got the current sort of costs that we sort of use. But the thing is, you can use anything you like. What you've just got to do is just demonstrate to your planners that there is a cause and effect there. What we've used the funding for, whole range of things. I have to say, originally we just used it mainly for stock, because what we didn't want to do is build lots of new libraries, because we couldn't afford running the libraries that we already got. And so therefore we thought, actually, we haven't really got a lot of revenue funding because this is just a one-off sort of funding. So we've used it to refurbish libraries. It's been brilliant for match funding. The main spend is around stock improvements that we've got, but we've used it for lifts, meeting rooms, RFID, scanning equipment, you know, shelving, because, you know, we've argued actually if we can make better use of existing library premises that allows more people there, more flexible spaces there, digital equipment. And as I said, for the first time during the pandemic, we used it for ebooks. If they sort of come back to us, we've got a bit of a case that we can sort of use there. So, but we have not really used it for building new libraries in a sense. There's some big developments, and they did say to us, we'll build you a whole new library, but then we just worry about how we would run it and staff it so we'd just rather have the funding mainly sort of for stuff, which has really been helpful. Advantages, I was wondering whether to put this in or not. I didn't sort of want to sort of say this sort of publicly. It is a bit of like a magic money tree, because basically we've got this fund and we keep spending, but what's happened is it always keeps topping up. So we've put there, after how much is there? You got 500,000, you got 1 million, you got another sort of 20,000. Because we've been running it for so many years, we keep spending the money, more plans are going in and more are coming in. So it's a constant thing. So every week we'll be putting planning applications, every week, every month we might be spending. But it is just sort of a tree that sort of never sort of seems to stop, because at some stage the administration was getting to us and we're thinking, do we really want all that around it? Is it really worth it? But it's great, because basically once you get going and you've got all the plans, it's great, because basically it never runs out, because there'll always be new houses being built all the time, and because all the sort of formulas already in place, we've got that as a sort of a stash of sort of funding that we can use. And we mainly use it for added value items. So if we're refurbishing a library and we want something really special in that library, we can sort of then sort of buy extra high quality areas there. We an income stream, not a lot, because it's not a lot of sort of ongoing sort of work. We can anything that we want, we sort of use it sort of across there. An example, we bought that robot. We've got this nano robot. You might have seen a few tweets. It's sort of there. It's about sort of £12,000. We find it quite difficult to sort of justify sort of using our own sort of funds or sort of grants or to do that. But we basically bought it for one of the libraries. We had an additional maker space that we had there. So, so actually we've got planning game. Why don't we use it there? It'll support that development in that area. So, we can sort of buy those sort of nice things that you probably would find difficult to buy yourself. There is some disadvantages. It's not all magic money tree. A lot of administration sort of there. You do need to make sure you keep good records, and somebody's looking through these applications and doing the sort of the invoicing aspect of it there. And I suppose the other sort of disadvantage is, I mentioned to you that one of the districts don't have planning aid, and even the districts that do have planning aid that we get, it's not always necessary we get money in the right priority libraries. So often we get small libraries or libraries in very well-to-do areas where there's huge amounts of planning aid that's coming in, because lots of people want to build nice houses there, so lots of money's coming there. But we really want to, the money where we would really like to spend a lot of the money is in some of the sort of poorer areas, but there's not a lot of planning sort of happening there. So it does sometimes cause tension between libraries. Well, why has that library, when they can have new furniture, and when something gets ripped, they can have this or have a bit of extra, where others that we would really like to spend it. So it's not all sort of plain sailing there. But it is good, because when I go to staff meetings and, if they have got planning aid and they want something new, at least I know there's a source of funding that we can get some additional sort of areas, equipment or something sort of across there. And finally, Sophie mentioned this right at the beginning in terms of championing sort of libraries there. We have got a Warwickshire case study which sort of talks about how much we charge and how it all works there. So I think on page 21 on here you've got the case study. There's more detail there. Sorry, that was such a quick whistle tour through the planning process here in Warwickshire. And now I'll try and I'll come off.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Ayub. And I think it's such a big and detailed subject as well, that everything's kind of a bit of a whistle stop tour, but it felt like in both yours and Martin's presentations, there was just a huge amount in there. One thing that really jumped out when you were talking about North Warwickshire, not meaning to put any particular district under the spotlight, when you add the data as well, it did have the smallest population, but also the smallest percentage of library numbers within that as well. And do you think there is a line that can be drawn between the contribution of Section 106 funding to libraries and the proportion of the population who access libraries?
I think that would be really quite sort of difficult to put those two together, because they could argue, the developers could argue, actually very few people in North Warwickshire use a library, so why should we give you planning aid when all these new people come there? So that it might be for their favour, but on the other hand, we can argue, look, there's so few people use it, that's why we need more libraries, or we need to expand the libraries that we've got. So you can play those statistics either way, but the key thing is to show that there's quite a large percentage of people using libraries in those areas, and that's the key thing that we try to show.
Brilliant, thank you. Does anyone have any questions specifically for Iob before we open it out to the rest of the presenters as well? We've got a few, in fact, Jill Terrell's put one just for Iob, but I think we can ask Martin and Sophie to comment as well. In terms of creating meeting rooms, are you able to charge for hire under Section 106, or does it depend on your agreement locally?
No, of course, no. Basically, there'd be no reason for you. There'd be no reason not to charge. So basically, what happens is they give you the money, and you can charge people for using that. It could be an income sort of stream. So yes, you can create meeting rooms and you can charge. They're not really interested in the bolts and sort of issues sort of across that. So that's create a meeting room and then use it as a way of raising income for future.
Yeah, I used to be involved in community centres, building community centres in South Gloucestershire, and obviously they won't be viable unless they charge. So absolutely no problems about charging for facilities that are built. It's, I say, community centres are part of that. We're usually in the same negotiations with community centres.
Brilliant, thank you. And Janine Downs asked a question earlier on about how it works in a two-tier authority. Janine, has Iob answered your questions within his presentation, or is there anything additional you'd want to ask?
Yeah, I think so. It just means you have to work harder, doesn't it? From what I can work out.
I think the key thing is to try and work with your infrastructure people within the county council, and they'll deal with all the district people because they'll be dealing with schools and everything. So the key thing is get to your infrastructure people within the county council, become really good friends with them, and hopefully they'll do the rest of the work for the rest of they'll link with all the district and boroughs and get all that sort of planning there. So it's the key thing is trying to find who they are within the council.
Thanks, Iob.
It also sounded you saying about having something that's replicable across the different districts as well. So not rewriting things, just having something that's a standard that you can then send out to each one. Brilliant, thank you. And Fiona Harrison asked, does everyone still receive Section 106, or has it all moved on to CIL? And my understanding is that CIL is kind of planned ultimately as a replacement for 106, but my understanding on this might be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you were right, and my understanding was that at one point CIL was going to sort of take over, and that's why we weren't really sort of bothered at one stage about should we continue with putting in applications. And what we were told was basically continue with 106 because it'll be going on for quite a while. But I think where CIL sort of came in, my understanding was it's really to fund those big infrastructure projects like a big road. So in a sense, you can't say a road only links to a certain 2 mile sort of radius. You know, if you needed a road to go from north of the county to the south of the county to make access it. So it's funding the really big infrastructure projects that aren't related necessarily to the location where those houses are. So I think that's what sort of my understanding was, that they'll use CIL to fund mega schemes that basically will be major infrastructure projects that don't necessarily link to that locality. So I think Section 106 will still be going for a while.
Yeah, I think we've noticed certainly with CIL, our contributions have dried up in the last few years, but I think there has been a change now, and Section 06 is coming back. It's whether your development is seen as a strategic building. So leisure centres, which I also have dealings with, they would be seen as strategic buildings, so they would apply for CIL. What tends to happen with CIL is the money goes into the authority, and then there's a bun fight within the authority about how it's allocated. And sometimes, as I have said, it will go to the big spending departments, the highways, and libraries. We can lose out. So certainly, my experience is Section 06 is more of is better value because it's in legislature. Once that's in a planning agreement, it cannot be used for anything else. But CIL has not been particularly good for our library authority. Really, it's I think it's tended to be used for big capital projects.
Brilliant. Thank you. Fiona, does that answer your question?
Hi, it's Felicity Harrison.
Oh, Felicity,
Yes. I mean, we have benefited from CIL recently, but the 106 contributions have really dried up. But that does help to explain it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Do we have any other questions from anyone, from either Sophie, Martin, or Ayub?
Yeah, actually, I had another question. It's Felicity Harrison again. I was really interested with Ayub that he'd been able to spend some of this on ebooks, and I wondered. I've been told that we can't do that because they can't be seen. We can't use capital funding for this, as ebooks aren't assets and have no resale value, so they have to be revenue expenditure.
Yeah. So with a right, when the funding comes into us, we can sort of basically use it as we sort of like. So generally we spend it on capital, but it doesn't have to be strict capital, if that makes sense. And it's the first time we've sort of done it. It's the first time we've sort of done it, you know, in a sense. Our books, I suppose books are classed as capital, but it depends on, one book wouldn't be classed as capital, you know, £30,000 worth of books could be classed as capital. But what we've basically done was we've got an internal spreadsheet that we've used, which we can demonstrate that every local library has benefited because there's a percentage everyone sort of used. And it's the first time we've just done it for a few weeks. So somebody might come to us and say to us that they challenge us sort of on that. But I doubt it, and it was only 25,000 is how much we've got in there, so you know we'd probably be able to deal with that. But generally you don't have to, I don't think, use 106 for capital projects necessarily. So there may be something that we want to buy something for, I don't know, £800. Generally, that, you know, capital would mean you had to be more than £3,000 or whatever to be classed as capital. But we can use it on small scale things. I don't know whether, Martin, that's your experience.
Yeah, I think in the funding agreement, it will say in the Section 06 agreement what it's going to be used for, and we tend to say stock, furniture, and IT. So I think under the ebooks we would say that it comes under stock. It doesn't say hard copy stock, it says stock, and so we would treat it fairly broadly, as Ayub did interpret it, and I think we would spend it on ebooks, and we do intend to spend it on ebooks because that's benefiting the population, and because of the nature of ebooks, which is, you know, you can only have one person borrowing it at a time. If you've got an increase in population, that's putting more pressure on that ebook collection. Therefore, there's be fewer books for people that live there already, so therefore it's totally justifiable.
Brilliant, thank you. The other thing that I was just thinking in terms of what counts as capital expenditure is, and even if we're saying that Section 106 doesn't need to be capital, we're looking at discussions around a different bid which involves the purchase of iPads for a lending scheme, and we're trying to work out, we're allowed a certain amount of capital funding within that, and we're trying to work out whether the iPads would form capital or whether they wouldn't, and I'm kind of just thinking whether that discussion then plays into some of this as well, and what we ended up saying was that the physical iPad would count as capital, but any connection and support and network stuff wouldn't count as capital. Is that how you probably approach it with this as well?
Yeah, I think that it's IT equipment. I'd put it under that heading, but yeah, but not the network costs. There are some we haven't quite tested this. There's some you can use it for setup costs. So if you did a project and the setup costs, and I'm not sure how we're looking at how we interpret setup costs, because we're looking at we've got some money to extend a library and we want to make that into a maker space. And we're saying, well, could we use some of that funding to set up and actually fund a member of staff to set the project up, because that is setup costs. So we're pushing the boundary of that a bit to see whether we can use setup costs, that interpretation setup costs for a capital project. Because in a capital project, if you did build a new building, you can pay for architects, for all the those developments to help build the building. And therefore, we're arguing if you're going to build a building, you need architects. Then to actually set up get the building up and running, you do need a staff to get that project up and running. So we might be trying to use Section 06 for that.
Brilliant. Well, it'd be interesting to see how far you can push those boundaries in that case. We've got one other question, or one question that I had before we go out again, is just if people aren't collecting Section 106 or CIL funding at the moment, what would you recommend in terms of a way to start that? Would you recommend a big blast of activity to fill the pipeline, or to start slow and slowly build it up?
First thing I would do is grab a copy of the that document, the Arts Council one, because it gives it a bit of sort of status, they sort of come there. Basically print a copy of that, just get it off the web, and then go and try and find out who your infrastructure sort of colleagues are within the council. Go to them and say, look, we're really interested to find out more about how we can sort of do that, and take with you the business case. So what you need to do is basically, the things that I put some slides that were a bit busy. Take the reasons why you think you should. So if you took these standards and say, yes, they are still public library standards, that's what we say, although they're not sort of used anymore, say there still are standards. These are produced by the government. This is the legislation, which means that we have to have a comprehensive and efficient sort of library service. This is the reasons, this is the percentage of people that are there. Take those bullet points and talk to your infrastructure, your planners, and say, how do we do that? And what they'll probably say is, the plan is due to be reviewed here. Come back to us now during this time. And if you get to them and get this put in the plan, then you'll have this magic money tree that will hopefully support your service for years. It's been supporting our service for about 10-15 years. It's just money just comes in every month. There's money coming in just automatically, but you just have to get in at the right time. So it may be you go to them and say, it's not the right time, we've just signed off our plan and it's not in there, but you've got to try and work out when the right time will be and get that business case to them. I don't know whether, Martin, you've got any further advice.
Yeah, I think I was right. I've just put in the plan. I've just sent it to one person, but I'll send it to everyone. I can send you a copy of our detailed evidence base, which is 13 pages in the infrastructure development plan, that makes the case why we should get the money. But yeah, make that contact, but there will be someone in the planning department. If you're in a unitary, as I've said, it is a great deal easier, but there should be somebody who goes through the planning applications and makes the case. And politically, that parts of talking, making sure the politicians are aware they could be losing out on funding from developers, because I think the case is that very often the case isn't they'll either give it to you or another section. You are eligible, you are entitled to it, and therefore should be claiming it. I think there has been cases where, someone mentioned in the chat about viability. We have had a couple of cases where the developer has said, well, if we give all this money to libraries, the whole project will not be viable. And I do public art as well. Often we get that challenge. Sometimes we have had to back down, but it's a dangerous thing to do, because if one developer, they all do talk, and if they found out you were prepared to not ask it for one development, it could start difficult conversations with future ones. But yeah, go to the go to the old planning department and find out who does Section 06 and give them that document, and say, well, other authorities are getting it, why aren't we?
Yeah. And the other thing was that, I have been prepared to go twice to court because what's happened is the developers have sort of refused to sort of pay, and my sort of infrastructure sort of colleague said, will you come and defend us? And because I've got that bit of evidence there, we've said that, and we've said yes, we will. But what we've basically said is, actually, when it comes to it, we probably won't bother going to court. If we don't get it within that development, is that going to sort of be there? So we bluffed, if you like, the sort of developers and say, yeah, we're going to take you to court. But in reality, we probably wouldn't be bothered wasting our time spending a day going to London or Birmingham to court on that day for that small sort of development there. But generally, our experience is the libraries are tiny, and a lot of the developers are quite happy to give it to libraries because basically we're not asking for a few thousand, 200,000, 250. But what the health centres and the schools and the parks, they're asking for millions and millions. So in a sense, it says, right, if you're going to have this development, we need a whole new health centre, which is really expensive. We whole new school, which is millions and millions of pounds. Therefore, they're quite happy in terms of paying that. But saying that, I think some of the developers, particularly the smaller sites, are quibbling now, and they think, why should we pay for libraries? But others are saying, actually, we'd rather pay for that because it's quite a small amount compared to the big areas that they're expected to pay for.
Yeah, we've had a number of chats. When we did go to one planning inquiry where we had to brief a barrister, and we did, because I think the danger is if we don't ask it, we could lose it. And I think the problem if you go now, the developers could say, well, you haven't asked for it for previous ones. Why is it suddenly an issue now? And that could be a problem, which you just be aware of when you are if you're starting off from scratch and never asked it before. Obviously, developers, they know nobody wants to give up money. We're all human. So you just need to see it from their point of view. But if you've got a good case and say, this is how we would use it, it would benefit the developers, and it would help. It would help sell. It can help sell houses by saying, a nice library nearby. This is all the benefits of having a library service. It's better than building a road and many other facilities that go in. A library is an absolute asset to most communities.
I'm muted. We've got a couple of questions as well so Jack Norman mentioned something earlier on in the chat about one of the councils waiving the criteria in the planning application to help the developer, which from the sounds of it is not unheard of. And then also asked us a question about new carpets as well. So Jack, if you're still around, do you want to just ask that?
Yeah, I could answer Jack's question because that North Warwickshire example where I said that we don't get it. I think what they've basically done is waived the fact that we're not going to expect the developer to pay for X, Y, Z. So that's really a case where even within the county council, there's one district council or one planning authority that are basically waived it because they probably want to have more housing and development sort of in there and encouraging, incentivize the developer there. So that's there. So yes, lots of authorities. So don't be disheartened if you've gone to one or two. If you're a county council and one or two of them say no, don't think all the others will say no. Go to each one sort of separately there. And yes, you can definitely, I think, buy carpets with it. We've used it for refurbishments. That's what it's there for. We'll just say there's more people that step on the carpet, the more wear it's what else, what else can we do? Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions from anyone? Sophie, did you have anything to comment on from any of that?
No, not really. Just to say that if I'm more than happy to have a conversation with people individually. I think that in the document link that I put in the chat, there are other case studies, but obviously this goes back to 2019. And I think, bearing in mind that there is a big move on the number of housing or the numbers of houses that are required, this is potentially an opportunity to get in onto your local planners.
Brilliant, thank you. Any more questions before we draw it to a close? And any final words from Martin or Io?
No, just go for it. Just go for it, and keep going to the planning applicant department, because you might have asked them a few years ago and it might have been the wrong time. Just my advice would be is, every year go there, because you just have to get at the right time when they're doing the new agreements, and you don't know when they are. So if you've had a bad experience before, don't think that's it, my authority isn't going to support it. It's just you might have new people in the planning authority. It's a different era now. There's lots of housing because of the local plans that are sort of going in. The government is expecting so many more authorities to have housing, and it just might be the right time. So if you've done it before, don't think, no, I'm not going to do it. Just keep knocking on their doors.
Yeah, I agree totally with Iob. I think that's the way to do it, work with the planners.
Brilliant, thank you. And it sounds like the best time to do it is 10 years ago, and then the second best time to do it is right now.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So thank you, Sophie, Martin and Iob. It's been really, really good, and thank you for everyone who's participated and asked questions, and everyone who's listened as well. The next session that we'll be having will be in 2 weeks' time, and we are looking at focusing on the Community Renewal Fund. We're just trying to work out the times and whether 2 weeks' time might be a bit too late for the Community Renewal Fund. The timeframes for the Community Renewal Fund, which is this year's pilot of the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the government's fund to replace the contribution from EU funds to redevelopment and infrastructure across the UK. So the timeframes for them appear to be, for most local authorities, basically now up until mid-May, for organisations to put in their bids to the coordinating authority, who then selects out of that and then puts those bids back into the MHCLG, the ministry. And so if people are looking at doing that and looking at the Community Renewal Fund, then the time basically to look at that is now as well. So we're just working out whether it's worth doing one in 2 weeks' time, or whether we should put one on really quickly, basically next week, if that will be of benefit to people. So does anyone have any particularly strong views either way on that? All right. Thank you, Sarah. We will be putting up, because we're working with one of a group of libraries to support them in a bid as well. And so we'll be going through that process, and we'll be kind of just all the stuff that we're gathering around that process, we'll be putting on the Income Generation Network as well, because it will be the same for different library services as well. So we'll make sure that all of that stuff goes up and people can access that too. So yeah, thank you. You've got 8 minutes of your day back as well. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. We'll get a summary of, we'll get the video out, and then a review document, a survey, feedback survey out as well. But we'll also share the presentations and then information on the upcoming webinars as well. Thank you.